The Titanic was really a cover for a highly classified military operation.
Before his time runs out, Titanic explorer Robert Ballard has admitted something he long kept buried beneath the waves. For decades, the man who found the world's most famous shipwreck carried secrets darker than rusted steel and broken chandeliers. What he finally revealed doesn't just change how we see the Titanic, it changes how we see him.
2 nuclear submarines that we lost during the Cold War with all hands, the USS Thresher and the USS Scorpion. They ironically turned out to be on either side of where the Titanic was lost.
The most shocking fact is that his historic quest was a cover for a dangerous Cold War mission. This isn't just a story about discovery, it's about a confession he was ordered never to make. Hiding in plain sight. Long before he was the man synonymous with the Titanic, Robert Ballard was a kid from Kansas obsessed with an ocean he'd never seen. That obsession led him to a career in oceanography and eventually to the U.S. Navy. By the early 1980s, Ballard was a brilliant marine geologist, but he was also a commander in the Naval Reserve. You see, he had a unique skill set that the military found incredibly valuable. He was a pioneer in deep-sea exploration, developing revolutionary underwater robots, or RUVs, that could go where no human could. The thing nobody tells you is that during the Cold War, the Atlantic Ocean was a tense, invisible battlefield. The US and the Soviet Union played a deadly game of cat and mouse with their nuclear submarines. 2 of America's most advanced subs, the USS Thresher and the USS Scorpion, had been lost in the 1960s under mysterious circumstances, taking hundreds of sailors with them. The Navy was haunted by these losses. They desperately needed to know what happened. Did their reactors fail? Were they leaking nuclear material into the ocean? Or the most terrifying question of all, had the Soviets been involved? The most shocking fact is these wrecks were lying at depths of over 10,000 feet, under pressures that would crush a normal submarine like a soda can. Sending people down was out of the question. The Navy needed Ballard and his robots. They approached him in 1982 with a top-secret proposal: find the Thresher and the Scorpion. But they had a huge problem. Sending a high-profile research vessel to poke around lost nuclear subs would set off alarm bells in Moscow. They needed a cover story, and Ballard gave them the perfect one: the Titanic. He pitched them a deal that sounded, to put it mildly, audacious. He told the Navy he knew the general area where the Titanic had sunk, which just so happened to be between the locations of the 2 lost submarines. His proposal was simple: fund his expedition to find the subs, and as a cover, he would tell the world he was searching for the Titanic. If he had any time left after the classified mission, they'd let him actually look for it. The Navy agreed. The hunt for the world's most famous shipwreck was officially a smokescreen for a clandestine military operation. This changes the entire story. The 73-year search for the Titanic wasn't just a passion project. It was a geopolitical chess move. Ballard wasn't just an explorer, he was a government contractor working on a mission of national security. When his team set sail in 1985, only a handful of people on board knew the true objective. The world was watching, hoping for a historical miracle, completely unaware that the real prize for the US government was data on decaying nuclear reactors. But this secret mission gave Ballard an unexpected advantage. While studying the wreckage of the Scorpion, he realized that the ocean currents had scattered a long trail of debris across the seafloor. He learned that looking for the massive hull was the wrong approach. The smart way to find a wreck was to look for its breadcrumb trail of debris. This was the key that would unlock the Titanic's location, a lesson learned while on a mission he could never speak about. What he found next was something the Navy never wanted the public to see: the discovery of a lifetime. With the classified part of his mission complete, Robert Ballard had only 12 days left. The clock was ticking. Many people are crazy about the idea of a lone genius having a eureka moment, but the discovery of the Titanic was anything but. It was a methodical, grinding search based on the secret lesson he'd learned from the USS Scorpion. Don't look for the ship, look for its ghost. He began sweeping the search area not for a massive hull, but for the trail of debris he knew must have been left as the Titanic broke apart and plunged 2.5 miles to the ocean floor. His team worked in exhausting shifts, staring at grainy video feeds from their robotic sled, Argo, as it skimmed just above the seabed. For days, they saw nothing but an endless expanse of mud and sand. Morale was sinking. Many on the crew felt they were on a wild goose chase. You see, the search area was a massive 150 square miles, and finding anything was like trying to spot a single coin in a desert at midnight. Then, just before 2 in the morning on September 1st, 1985, something appeared on the monitor. It wasn't mud, it was man-made. An object that looked like a giant circular crater. It was one of the Titanic's massive boilers torn from the ship's guts during its violent descent. The control room, which had been quiet and tense, erupted. They had found the breadcrumb. They knew the ship had to be close. What many overlooked is that this wasn't just a victory for science, it was the moment the cover story became real. Ballard and his team followed the debris field, which was over a mile long. They passed over twisted pieces of metal, a single serving platter, a champagne bottle still intact, and heaps of coal. Then Argo's cameras tilted up, and a colossal dark shape emerged from the gloom. It was the bow of the RMS Titanic. It was upright, majestic, and eerily preserved in the freezing, lightless water. It looked like a ghost ship with rusticles hanging off its hull like frozen tires. The moment was solemn. There was no cheering, only a profound sense of awe and sadness. They were not just looking at a shipwreck, they were floating over a mass grave where 1,500 people had lost their lives. The thing nobody tells you is the raw emotional power of that moment. Ballard later described seeing the ship's portholes looking back at them like vacant eyes. He saw the elegant windows of the promenade deck where wealthy passengers once strolled, now gaping open to the eternal darkness. What he chose not to show the world were the most personal and disturbing sights. Pairs of shoes lying side by side in the silt. These were not just artifacts. They were markers where victims had come to rest before their bodies were consumed by the deep. This was the human cost, the part of the story the triumphant headlines would never capture. The cover story had worked perfectly. But now, Ballard had a new secret to keep, a global obsession. When the news broke, it didn't just make headlines, it ignited a global firestorm. The Titanic, a ship that had existed only in history books and fading memories, was suddenly real again. The haunting images Ballard's team captured were broadcast across the planet, and the world was captivated. You can see this everywhere, from magazine covers to nightly news broadcasts. The ghost ship had returned from its watery grave, and Robert Ballard was the hero who had resurrected it. He became an overnight celebrity, a modern-day Jacques Cousteau. But not all things are what they seem. While Ballard was being celebrated, he was still bound by his secret pact with the Navy. He couldn't tell anyone that the groundbreaking discovery was a side quest to a classified military operation. So he played the part of the dedicated explorer who had fulfilled a lifelong dream. And in a way, he had. But the story he told was a carefully edited version of the truth, a narrative that protected national security while cementing his own legacy. Titanic mania swept the globe. Documentaries were rushed into production. Books that had been out of print for decades became instant bestsellers. Museums began planning exhibitions. To put it mildly, the world was obsessed. The public's appetite for anything Titanic-related was insatiable. For a handful of elderly survivors still alive at the time, the news brought a flood of painful memories. Some were grateful the ship had been found, while others felt its final resting place should never have been disturbed. This is where the story takes a turn. Ballard had always insisted the wreck should be treated as a memorial. He famously said, "Go to the Vatican with a shovel, you'll be arrested. Go to the Titanic with a salvage vehicle and you're a hero." He pleaded with governments to declare the site a maritime memorial, protected from treasure hunters and salvagers. He wanted the ship and its contents left in peace, an untouched tribute to the 1,500 souls who perished. What many overlooked is that by finding the Titanic, Ballard had inadvertently painted a giant treasure map for the entire world. The very discovery he wanted to protect also made the wreck vulnerable. Soon, other expeditions were launched, not for science, but for profit. These teams had a different philosophy. They believed the artifacts should be recovered and preserved before they disintegrated into the abyss. This sparked a bitter conflict that rages to this day. Was it preservation or plunder? Ballard's historic achievement had unleashed a monster he couldn't control. A battle for the soul. As Titanic mania surged through the 90s, Hollywood couldn't resist. Director James Cameron, already a cinematic titan with hits like Terminator 2, became utterly consumed by the idea of the shipwreck. But Cameron's interest went far beyond storytelling. He wanted to experience the Titanic firsthand, to see the wreck with his own eyes and to capture it in ways no one had before. In the mid-1990s, he launched a series of expeditions to the ocean floor, employing cutting-edge submersibles, cameras, and sonar technology. Every dive brought the ship into sharper focus, revealing the haunting details of its decay, the crumpled hull, the scattered debris, the eerie remnants of lives abruptly ended. Cameron was determined to translate this underwater graveyard into cinema that could make audiences feel the Titanic's grandeur and tragedy simultaneously. When Titanic hit theaters in 1997, it became more than a movie. It became a cultural juggernaut. Cameron's film transformed the historical tragedy into an epic love story that would define the disaster for a whole generation. For many, the Titanic was no longer just a ship lost at sea, it was Jack and Rose, their romance suspended in the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The box office numbers were staggering, with billions in global revenue and 11 Academy Awards cementing the movie's place in cinematic history. The public's obsession with the Titanic intensified, reaching heights that Robert Ballard, the ship's discoverer, could scarcely have imagined. And yet, this cultural wave complicated Ballard's own legacy. On one hand, the film ensured the Titanic would never fade from public consciousness. On the other, it stripped the real tragedy of its solemnity, turning a mass grave into a storybook romance. Ballard found himself in an uncomfortable paradox. He had made the discovery possible, yet the narrative of the Titanic had spun far beyond his control. He repeatedly emphasized that the wreck was not a movie set, that it was the resting place of over 1,500 souls, a site of profound human loss. But his cautions were often drowned out by orchestral swells and cinematic spectacle, leaving the public enthralled by a romance more than a reality. Meanwhile, the battle over the ship's artifacts escalated into a full-blown controversy. RMS Titanic Incorporated, a company granted legal salvage rights, began recovering thousands of items from the wreck. Fine china, jewelry, letters, even a 17-ton section of the hull. These artifacts became centerpieces for blockbuster museum exhibits, attracting millions of visitors eager to touch history. To the public, it was a rare chance to glimpse the past. To Ballard, it felt like grave robbing. The debate was relentless. RMS Titanic Incorporated argued that it was preserving history, rescuing treasures from the destructive forces of the deep. Ballard and his supporters countered that these items were personal effects, remnants of lives lost, and that their removal desecrated a memorial. For Ballard, this argument wasn't abstract, it was deeply personal. He had located the Titanic, brought it into the world's attention, and yet now he was helpless as the ship's remains were dismantled piece by piece. Each artifact displayed in a museum, each fragment sold or exhibited for profit, felt like a violation of the site he had fought so hard to protect. Ballard's discovery had given the Titanic immortality in popular imagination, but it had also placed him at the center of an ethical storm. He had unveiled history, yet he watched as history was reshaped and commodified. For him, the Titanic was never about spectacle. It was about memory, respect, and the human stories frozen beneath the waves. The ship that had once vanished into the dark Atlantic had re-emerged, but in ways Ballard could never have anticipated. A spectacle adored by millions, a romance celebrated worldwide, and a grave that had become a stage for commerce, not remembrance. Ballard kept his promise to the Navy for decades. But was he right to finally reveal the truth? Let us know your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.